Next, let's move over to Composition 4, which shows our grids in a slightly different way. In this composition, we have our XY, XZ, and YZ layers still on those same planes, but instead of separating each plane by color, the illustrations on each layer are colored with the colors of their respective axes. So we'll see the red is our x-axis, the y is our green axis, and the z is our blue axis. If we take a look at the properties for the YZ axis, this layer down here at the bottom of the composition, indicated by the green label, we can see that this entire layer has been rotated in 3D space. Now, it may be difficult to see with all of the other layers turned on, so we'll simply solo this layer. With this layer soloed, we can see the 3 axes for the layer, and we can also see the axes for the entire environment over on the left-hand side of the comp panel. On the layer itself, we can see that the y-axis is still up and down, but the red axis, the axis for x, is pointing in the z position, and the blue axis, the axis for z, is pointing in the negative x direction. The reason for this is that the entire layer has been rotated. If we open up the parameters here and check out our transformation values, we can see that the value for y rotation has been modified 90 degrees. If we change this by moving it back to its original rotation, 0 degrees, we can see that the x, y, and z now match the environment. The axis that we're currently controlling our layer with is the local axis. And by clicking and dragging the handles on the local axis, we can move the layer in relationship to the local coordinates. So if I click and drag on the x-axis, you can see the x value update in the position value of the transformation. If I click and drag on the y-axis, you'll see the values change there as well. If I click and drag on the z-axis, by dragging it in the position of the arrow, I'll actually lower the value because it's moving toward my virtual camera. If I drag in the opposite direction of the arrow, I will add distance between the camera and the layer and increase the value for my z position. By clicking and dragging on the axes, you can see that once my cursor reaches the edge of the screen, I can't move any further and the layer stops. Instead of simply clicking and dragging on the axes, I may want to use the Shift key. If I click and drag on the axes while holding down the Shift key, After Effects is going to multiply the distance that I'm dragging. Continuing to use the Shift click on the axes will make it move even further than I have space to drag my cursor. If I simply click and drag on the layer itself, we can see all of the values changing. That's because we're moving the layer in X, Y, and Z space. If we click on the layer alone, then hold the Shift key down and drag either left, right, or up and down, you can see different values change, but the layer is snapping to just the horizontal or vertical motion. The reason for this is that by holding the Shift key down, we're actually using a different axis to move the layer around. In order to see these different axes, let's change our position values back to 400, 400, and 0. Now our layer is set back to the center of our composition, and we can see the local axes in the center of our layer. In our toolbar, in the Options area, we have the ability to change the axes we use for the different layers. The first one is the local view, and we're seeing exactly how the axis matches the layer. If we choose the second one, the icon that looks like a small sphere, we will get an axis that follows the world view. The world view may appear to be the same as the local axis now, but if we change the rotation value for this layer, by changing the Y rotation to a positive 90 degrees, we can see that although our layer has rotated, the axis has not. The world axis is going to always follow our world coordinates, and we can see our world coordinates down in the lower left-hand corner of our comp window. The last axis is the view axis. Now this is an odd one, and we simulated it by holding down the Shift key. If we select the view axis by clicking on the third icon in the toolbar for our different axes views, we can see that the axis on the layer has now changed to look directly at the camera. This is going to be the same for every view although the axis is going to modify the layer in different camera views. Remember, this axis is going to take on the properties of our camera and appear to point with the z-axis looking directly into the lens. Most of the time when you're working inside 3D, you'll probably want to use the local axis in order to see the 3D coordinate system for your layer. We'll switch back to that by simply clicking on the icon. And now we can see the heading for our anchor point, our position, and the rotation values all defined by this local axis.